Maybe you've had one of those nights. You did everything right today. You showed up, you helped everyone, you smiled when it was hard. And somewhere around midnight, lying there in the dark, a small voice asked you the same question it always asks. Was it enough? Were you enough? We've all felt that question before, even if we never said it out loud. Welcome back to Slow Down with Brenda. Today, we're going to sit with something a lot of us carry quietly, every single day, without ever really understanding where it came from. It's not a personality flaw, it's not something broken in you, it's something much older than that, and once you see it, you might never look at yourself the same way again. Here's a small moment to start with. Think about the last time you said, "I'm fine," when you weren't. Maybe someone asked how you were doing, and the real answer was too heavy, too complicated, too much. So you gave them the shorter version, the easier version, the one that wouldn't make anyone worry. We do that so often we stop noticing we're doing it at all. Maybe you're the one who double-checks if people are upset with you, even when nothing was said. Maybe you're the one who feels a flicker of guilt when you finally sit down to rest, like you haven't earned it yet. Maybe you're the one who takes care of everyone else's feelings in the room, long before anyone asks you to. None of that happened by accident. Somewhere, a long time ago, you learned that this was how love worked, and that lesson has been quietly running your life ever since. There's a kind of hunger that has nothing to do with food. It's the hunger to be nurtured, to be protected, to be guided by someone who simply had your back, no conditions attached. Psychologists actually have a name for it now. They call it mother hunger. And here's the part that might catch you off guard, one we'll come back to in just a moment. This need runs deeper than most of us ever realize, deep enough that it quietly shaped nearly everything about who we became. So when that early bond wasn't quite steady enough, wasn't quite safe enough, we didn't just shrug it off as children. We adapted. We found a way to survive it. And whatever we became in order to survive it, that's often who we still are today. Maybe that's the version of you that overachieves, so no one has a reason to be disappointed. Maybe it's the version that stays quiet during conflict because peace always felt safer than being honest. Maybe it's the version that gives and quietly wonders when someone will finally give back. We're not here today to hand you a diagnosis or make you relive anything painful. We're just going to slow down together and look at where some of this might have started. Because once you understand where a pattern came from, you stop fighting yourself for having it. And that alone can feel like putting down something very heavy. By the end of this video, you might finally have language for a feeling you've been carrying for years without a name. Let's get into it. Let's slow down on that word for a moment. Mother hunger. It's not a diagnosis, and it's not just a nice phrase. It points to something very specific, something almost every one of us can recognize once we hear it named out loud. There are 3 things every child needs, whether they got them fully or not. We needed to be nurtured, held close enough to feel like we truly belonged somewhere. We needed to be protected, safe enough that our nervous system could actually settle instead of staying quietly on alert. And we needed guidance, someone steady enough to help us figure out who we were becoming long before we could figure that out on our own. When even one of those 3 was missing, something in us noticed. Not in words, not in any way we could have explained back then, but our bodies noticed, and they adjusted. Maybe your home had plenty of love but not much steadiness. A parent who was warm one day and distant the next, so you learned to read a room the moment you walked into it, just to know which version of them you'd be dealing with. Or maybe there was structure, maybe even safety, but not much warmth, so you learned to keep your feelings small and manageable, because that's what seemed to earn approval. We don't consciously choose these patterns. We grow into them the way a plant leans toward whatever light it can find, even if that light is inconsistent, even if it's not quite enough. Here's the part that tends to stop people in their tracks. We are not simply emotionally drawn to connection. We are biologically wired for it, more strongly than we're wired for almost anything else, including food. Our need to attach to another person is one of the most powerful forces in the human body. So when that early bond wasn't quite steady enough, we didn't just notice it and move on. We adapted. We found whatever way we could to stay close to the person we needed most, because some part of us understood, without ever being told, that staying close meant staying safe. And whatever we did to earn that closeness back then, that's often the exact blueprint we're still following today, usually without realizing it. Maybe you were the child who never caused problems because you noticed early that peace kept everyone around you calmer, and calm felt safer than the alternative. Maybe you became the one who could sense a shift in someone's mood before they even said a word, adjusting yourself just enough to keep things from tipping over. Maybe you learned, quietly, that being needed felt a lot safer than simply being loved for no reason at all, so you became very good at being useful. None of that makes you dramatic or too much or hard to love, even if some part of you has believed that for years. It makes you someone who found a way to survive with whatever tools were available at the time. That's not weakness. That's actually a kind of quiet resilience, even if it doesn't always feel that way from the inside. Think about someone who still, even now, feels a small wave of guilt the moment they finally sit down and do nothing. Someone who checks in on everyone else in the room before they've even asked themselves how they're doing. Someone who says, "I'm okay," almost automatically, before they've had a chance to actually ask themselves if that's true. That's not a flaw in who they are. That might just be an old strategy, one that used to matter deeply, still quietly running somewhere in the background, long after the danger it was protecting against has passed. We're not here today to hand you a label and move on. We're here to look a little closer, together, and start understanding where some of this might have first taken root. Because a pattern we finally understand is a pattern we can begin to hold with a little more compassion. And that, more than anything, is usually where the real softening starts. Once we understand where these patterns come from, there's one truth underneath all of it that deserves its own moment. Sometimes, the hardest kind of love to heal from isn't the love that was missing. It's the love that was there but wasn't safe. That might sound backwards, so let's slow down on it. If a mother was simply absent, that hurts, but in a strange way, it doesn't feel personal. Something outside of you kept her away. Illness, distance, circumstances beyond anyone's control. It's painful, but it doesn't teach you that something is wrong with you. But when the person who's supposed to love you the most is also the person who criticizes the way you look, dismisses what you're feeling, or makes you feel like too much just for existing, that teaches something different. It teaches shame. It teaches you that love might come with conditions you can never quite meet. Maybe you know that feeling. Coming home after a hard day, hoping for comfort, and instead getting a comment about your weight or your grades or why you're too sensitive. Small moments like that don't just disappear. They add up quietly until they become a voice inside you that sounds a lot like your own, even though it never actually belonged to you. And when a wound like that comes from our very first relationship, the one we're biologically wired to trust more than any other, it becomes very hard to untangle later. It doesn't just live in our memory. It lives in the way we flinch at criticism, the way we brace for rejection before it even happens, the way we sometimes apologize for things that were never our fault. Here's something else that might surprise you. Many of us don't actually remember much from our early childhood, and that's not because nothing happened. It's because when a small child's brain becomes overwhelmed too often, too young, the body has a way of protecting itself. It quietly turns down the recording. Not because the moments didn't matter, but because they mattered too much for a nervous system that wasn't ready to hold them yet. So the mind lets go of the details, but the body remembers. It waits, patiently, until we're finally safe enough, old enough, steady enough, to feel what it's been holding on to all along. Maybe that explains why certain feelings show up without warning. A tightness in your chest during an ordinary conversation. A wave of sadness that doesn't seem to match what's happening around you. That's not you being irrational. That might be your body finally finding a safe enough moment to speak. Now, this isn't about deciding your mother was a bad person. Most mothers were doing the best they knew how, with whatever they themselves were carrying, whatever they were never taught, whatever they never healed from either. This isn't about placing blame on anyone. This is simply about noticing a need that went unmet, somewhere back then, and finally understanding why it still shows up now, in ways that might not make sense on the surface. Because here's the thing. If we grew up learning that love could be unpredictable, or conditional, or came with criticism attached, we don't just outgrow that lesson once we become adults. We carry it into how we love our partners, how we trust our friends, how gently or harshly we speak to ourselves when no one else is listening. We might find ourselves waiting for the other shoe to drop in relationships that are actually safe. We might over-apologize for things that don't need an apology at all. We might work twice as hard to be liked, just in case being ourselves isn't quite enough. None of that is a flaw in your character. It's an old form of protection, one that made complete sense for a smaller version of you, still trying to make sense of the world. And once we can see it clearly, without judgment, without blame, we finally have something we didn't have before. A choice. Not to erase what happened, but to understand it enough that it stops quietly running the show. There's a kind of grief hiding in all of this that nobody really prepares us for. When someone we love dies, we're allowed to grieve. There's a language built for that kind of loss. People bring us food, they sit with us in silence, they know it's okay to say nothing at all. But what do we do with a loss that never had a name? A version of love we needed, from someone who's still very much here, still very much alive. We don't really have a ritual for that kind of sadness, so a lot of us just quietly carry it, year after year, without ever calling it what it actually is. Maybe the first thing that shows up, if you sit with this long enough, is anger. A flicker of it, or maybe something bigger than a flicker. And if that's true for you right now, that's okay. That doesn't make you ungrateful or dramatic or unfair to the people who raised you. Anger is often just grief's first and clumsiest attempt to speak. Underneath that anger, there's usually something quieter waiting. A small, stubborn kind of hope. Maybe if I explain myself clearly enough, or become successful enough, or simply wait long enough, the apology will finally come. Not the kind that brushes past everything. Not, "I'm sorry you feel that way." The real kind. "I'm sorry I did that, and I mean it enough to actually do something different now." That apology might come one day. It might not. And that's one of the harder truths tucked inside all of this. Because forgiveness was never really about waiting for someone else to change first. Forgiveness, at its core, is simply the moment we stop wishing things had gone differently. Not because it didn't matter, not because it didn't hurt, but because we're finally ready to stop spending our energy on a version of the past that isn't coming, no matter how long we wait for it. That doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean pretending it was fine when it wasn't. It just means we quietly set the hope down so our hands are finally free to hold something else instead. Maybe it helps to ask yourself something gentle right now without rushing to answer it. What's one thing you're still hoping to hear from someone? Maybe it's, "I'm proud of you." Maybe it's, "I see how hard you try." Maybe it's simply, "I'm sorry, I didn't understand back then." And here's a small, honest question worth sitting with a little longer. What would it feel like to offer a version of that to yourself today, instead of waiting for it to arrive from somewhere outside of you? That's not a consolation prize. It's not settling for less than what you actually deserved. It's the quiet beginning of no longer needing someone else's permission to feel whole. We're not asking you to rush through any of this. Grief was never meant to move in a straight line, and there's no schedule you're supposed to be keeping. Some days, the sadness will feel lighter, almost distant. Other days, it might catch you off guard in the middle of something completely ordinary. Folding laundry, driving home, hearing a certain song. That doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That's simply what healing tends to look like, slower and messier than anyone ever tells us. But somewhere inside that slowness, something does start to shift, even if it's hard to notice at first. The hope stops pulling at you quite so hard. The waiting starts to feel a little less urgent, a little less like your whole life depends on it. And bit by bit, without any dramatic turning point, you start turning toward yourself instead of away. Maybe that's really what grief is for in the end. Not to erase what we lost, but to slowly loosen its grip on us until we finally have both hands free again. So where does all of this leave us? Maybe not with a fix, maybe not with a neat, tidy ending, but with something quieter and more honest than that. The needs we had back then, to be nurtured, to be protected, to be guided by someone steady, never actually disappeared. They just got quieter over the years, buried under everything we had to become in order to keep going. But they're still there, still asking, gently, to be met. And here's the part that actually feels hopeful. We don't have to wait for anyone else to meet them anymore. We can start becoming that steady presence for ourselves. It doesn't have to be big. It doesn't have to look like anything dramatic. It can be as small as showing up on time for the things you care about, the way you once wished someone had shown up for you. It can be speaking to yourself tonight the way you'd speak to someone you love, instead of the way you were once spoken to. It can be letting yourself rest without needing to earn it first. None of this happens overnight, and it was never supposed to. One honest, small step is enough for today. Tomorrow, there will be another one. Maybe the most important thing you take from this isn't a lesson at all. It's permission. Permission to stop asking what's wrong with you and start asking what happened to you and what you might still need now. That single shift, from self-blame to self-understanding, tends to change everything else that follows. If something in this video felt familiar, we'd genuinely love to hear from you. Of the 3 things we talked about today, nurturing, protection, or guidance, which one do you feel like you needed more of growing up? Leave it in the comments below. We read every single one, and your answer might be exactly what someone else needs to read today, to feel a little less alone. And if this channel has become a place where you feel a little more understood, a little more like yourself, consider subscribing. It genuinely helps us keep making content like this, and we'd love to have you here for whatever we talk about next. Slow down. You're not behind. You're just finally starting to understand.